positioning is critically important for any kind of upward lift on your fees. Because if you can just be compared apples to someone else and the client sees no meaningful difference between A and B, what are they going to look at? The price. It's the only thing they understand.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the important relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and our guest today is Jonathan Stark. Here are 3 things you want to know about Jonathan before we start. He is the president of Jonathan Stark Consulting, and he has been for 17 years. His life's mission is to rid the world of hourly billing, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And by the way, he has a 2nd-degree black belt, and he got his first degree when he was 50. And by the way, he looks 30. So welcome, welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I'm super excited.
That's going to be fun. So before we jump into the topic, how did you get into pricing?
My origin story was I was the vice president of a boutique software development firm, and we had about 10 developers. And when I got promoted to that position, I had access to everyone's salary. I knew what everybody made. And it occurred to me that since we billed everybody out at the same hourly rate, that our best developer, our most expensive developer, we were barely breaking even on. And our most junior developer, who was pretty much a glorified intern, we paid half as much, literally half as much. And we were making a lot of money off of them. So I was like, this can't be right. And it was kind of like, if we were going to fire someone to be our best guy, and we should hire a bunch of people who are barely know what they're doing, and we were sort of training on the job. And I just couldn't square that circle. And I thought about it for an embarrassingly long time before it even occurred to me to question the hourly billing model. And once I saw that, it was like the heavens opened. It was like, if we were doing some kind of fixed pricing, then our best developer would instantly be our most profitable. So I couldn't unsee that, and I didn't know what I was going to do instead, but I took this information or this insight to the owner. I explained it like I just did to you, and he was like, I see what you're saying conceptually, but how would we actually shift to something else, and what would we shift to? And I had no idea. So rather than sort of risk the salaries of 10, 12 people, I went solo to figure it out, and it went great. Right at the right time, I discovered Value-Based Fees by Alan Weiss, and I read that book cover to cover 10 times easily. And I just, slowly tried to internalize the lessons in that book. And that was 2006. And my very first year was way better than the previous year when I was billing hourly. And then it just kept getting better over time. So that was my come to Jesus moment.
Nice. What a fabulous story. And we haven't set up the podcast yet, but what we're going to do just for the listener's sake is somebody told me Jonathan is really trying to rid the world of hourly billing. And I said, well, first off, I agree with him, but it would be way more fun if I took the other side and let him try to convince us all that we really want to do hourly billing. Mm-hmm. And so my argument in the story that you just told might be, why don't you just charge a higher rate when that guy does his work?
Have different rates for each person?
Yes.
Yeah, because that would turn into a resource allocation problem, because it would be really hard to switch people around on different projects. I know companies do that, like for the project manager, it's this per hour, and for the software developer, it's that per hour. But these people ostensibly were like the same role, and it would have complicated things sort of somewhat dramatically because what we would have done was lowered the price of the junior guy, the hourly rate of the junior guy. We couldn't raise the price. We were already at the top of the market in terms of our hourly rates. It was like $150 an hour in the early 2000s. And that was pretty high for what we were doing. It was a really well-known firm. So if we shifted that up to $250 an hour for our best person, people would have just gone to a different place. That's one of the problems with hourly billing. Presents you as a commodity. Like here's my air quotes price, and they shop around for somebody who's less per hour, and they never ask the question, well, who's better, who's faster? It's just like, what's the hourly rate that seems reasonable to me? And 250 would have priced us out of the market.
So it'd be interesting to have seen a test where you say, I've got premier programmers at 250, and I have we don't want to call them the low end programmers, but the
junior developer.
Yeah. At 150, I'm happy to sell you whichever ones you want.
It would have been really complicated we wouldn't have wanted to do that, because we needed to be able to put open developer, whoever was open needed to go on the project. So if we gave that option to the customer, they said, well, we'll wait for the cheaper guy, or like, we want the expensive guy. Well, he's busy for the next 6 months. It just would have been really complicated to have that work. It wasn't like we had 200 people,
Right.
It was only about 10. So,
right. Okay. So let's see, here's my next argument.
Mm-hmm.
When I take my car into the shop and it's making a funny noise, they don't say to me, oh, it'll cost you $1,000. They say, we'll tear it apart and then we'll tell you what it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they charge me by the hour to fix my car. But on the other hand, if I want to get a new battery, they give me a price for the battery installed. And that's because they do enough batteries. They know what the work's going to be like, so they can get the job done. And so it's the uncertainty that keeps them from being able to give me a real price, a single price.
Well, yes and no. I mean, they could just give you a high price and have it average out, what they would consider a high price. So if you said to them, is this going to take, 5 hours or 50? They'd be like, well, it's not going to take 50, because if it takes more than 10, we're going to tell you that we either can't figure it out, or we can't fix it, or there should be some other approach. You should probably just buy a new car. So they could estimate at the high end, on average, for like a car rolls in with a funny noise, it's definitely not going to take us more than 20, some number of hours. And they could just multiply that by their rate and say, like, it's $2,000 for funny noise. And whatever the price is, that might not be acceptable to the customers. They might be expecting something cheaper. But again, that becomes becomes less of a problem if you're not a commodity. So what you're talking about is it's presented as a commodity body shop or whatever, a car repair shop. If it's not a commodity, then everything changes. You could say, well, yeah, it's guaranteed. It's $1,500 to figure out what that is. And then once we do know, or 100 or 1,000 or whatever makes sense for them. But over the course of all of the cars with a funny noise, they'll feel very profitable. Maybe some jobs will be harder. Some jobs will be easier. They'll be like, I know what this is. And for that $1,000 diagnostic or whatever it was, they're happy. And the customers will be more happy because they don't get into this like, oh, well, if I'd have known it was going to be $2,000 for you to diagnose this issue, I wouldn't have even done it. And it creates an incentive for the mechanics to get really fast at what they do. So investing in tools, investing in diagnostics, so they could, over time, they could actually lower their price and still make more money. But I'm probably over answering your question, but in software, well, go ahead. Yeah, I can see your.
No. I think that was a really good answer. And essentially what you said was, if I know an average cost of running a diagnostics and I add a decent sized margin on top of that, and I just know that most of my diagnostics are going to come in less than that. A couple will come in more than that, but on average, I'm going to make quite a bit of money.
Right.
And I get to say that upfront to the client.
Right.
So I get to say, look, it's $1,000. I get it. If you want to pay someone by the hour, go down the street, that's totally fine. But, we're going to do it for $1,000. May take us more, may take us less. We're taking the risk with you, or we're taking the risk. You don't have to.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, the thing that is under the surface here that's not obvious unless people have had the experience is when you switch to a fixed price up front, however you calculate it, when you switch to that fixed price, your quality of life goes through the roof. It's way better because the clients, you're not in this like tension relationship with the clients, especially when you're billing hourly and you start to get up to the original estimate, you go over the original estimate, you start to go over what it was worth to them in the first place, in the car example or in the software project example, which happens. it's very stressful for everyone. It's very, I mean, I've seen people fired. I've seen lawsuits up close and personal, people that have gone so far over budget that they get sued, and all of that goes away. You now have a risk of like, is this going to be profitable or not? But that's on you. And you're the expert, so you're the one that should be taking that risk. Like they're not betting on how good of an estimator you are. That's on you, I think, if you're an expert.
Right. And by the way, you get paid for taking a risk. So
yeah, that's where, yeah, I mean, risk reward. It's like cliche, but it's true.
Exactly. Okay. Next one. I had a really hard time finding a bookkeeper when I first started my business. And I found this lady, she charged me $500 a month. And I found that so freaking annoying, right? It's like, there's no way this is worth $500 a month for you to do my bookkeeping. And eventually I was lucky she fired me. So thank you for firing me. And I went and found a per hour bookkeeper, and I now pay about $120 a month for bookkeeping. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like I was getting ripped off, even while I was paying her money, by the way. I felt like I was getting ripped off.
Yeah. Again, commodity service. You know, if anybody can do it at a reasonable level of quality, if anybody can do a good enough job, then why not pick the cheapest? So there needs to be positioning is it wasn't really what we were going to talk about, but positioning is critically important for any kind of upward lift on your fees. Because if you can just be compared apples to someone else, and the client sees no meaningful difference between A and B, what are they going to look at? The price. It's the only thing they understand. So they're going to pick the cheaper one. And in your case, you don't care. Like the service level was probably, I mean, I had an email exchange with my bookkeeper today that was incredibly disappointing. And I'm like, you know, I could just switch to anybody and you're not going to do this thing for me that I would pay you to do. And it's like, oh, I don't know how to do that. Sorry. You know, you can't send me a CSV file. So, you know, I literally will probably switch bookkeepers after the email exchange I had today, because they're just, I've been with them for a long time, but they never add value. They never predict a question that's going to come into my mind. They see that I have they see that I have crypto, but they never do anything to just like proactively say, like, you know, we noticed that you've been sending some money to Coinbase. You probably don't know, but these are the ramifications of that. There's nothing proactive about it at all. So there's no switch. I mean, there's some switching costs for me just finding someone, but
right.
And I feel bad because, you know, I know that I've met the owner, you know, they're nice and everything, but they're just not given, there's just no brand loyalty. There's no, I can't imagine it being, well, I can imagine it being worse, but that it would almost be like violating their fiduciary responsibility if it was any worse.
Do you pay them by the hour or by the month?
Yeah.
By the hour? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, why won't you, anyway.
So I was thinking, and I don't know the answer to this, but there are times where I feel like I want to pay by the hour. And maybe I just came up with the answer, by the way, because everything you and I have talked about so far, I had not linked together that said hourly rates really go with commodities. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to be a differentiated solution provider, hourly, I mean, sure, you could charge a higher hourly rate, but that just feels weird.
Yeah. For me, when in a situation where I feel like I could do the thing I just don't want to, and I can get anybody, it's just like entering my expenses into a spreadsheet, you know, that's like, I don't care if it's hourly or not hourly, but I'm not going to place a high value on it. I'd kind of prefer if it wasn't hourly, because then I could just set it and forget it in terms of like what I pay them every month. Mm-hmm. But it's not going to my value. The value is just too low. So like you just said, you know, sometimes I want hourly. Well, not if it's $1,000 an hour, probably. The reason why you probably want hourly is probably it's going to be cheaper that way or easier to close the deal. Like maybe you can't clearly articulate what it is that you want as an outcome. So it's kind of R&D. It's kind of an exploratory thing, a short-term experiment, or it's this long-term kind of labor that's just busy work that you just don't want to do yourself. So, and again, commoditized. So like maybe you would perceive your effective hourly rate to be $1,000 an hour or $1,500 an hour. So in theory, you should be happy to pay anything less than that to someone who could do a job for you, to delegate to someone who could do the job just as well. But if it's commodity stuff, then you're just not gonna, because you're gonna find someone that's just cheaper. That the bookkeeper next door will happily do it for less. And this is part of the reason, not to monologue here, but this is part of the reason why people come to me. I don't normally try and convince people that hourly billing is a bad thing. It's like, hey, you're happy with hourly? Great. Call me in 3 years, because that's when you're going to get to the point where you're starting to become an expert or more of an expert, and you're working more and more and more. You're working so much that you feel like you can't get ahead. Your lifestyle is outstripping your ability to increase your rates. Maybe have a couple of kids. All of a sudden you're like, I'm like working weekends to afford summer camp or like baseball practice that I can't even go to because I'm working all the time. And then all of a sudden the light bulb comes on and they're like, oh, okay. These junior people who are nowhere near as good at me at what I do are undercutting my hourly rate, and they're getting all the deals because the clients, the prospects, can't tell the difference between them and me. So they're going to pick the cheaper one. It might not end up being cheaper, but it appears to be cheaper on the label. Oh, $35 an hour. Let's do that.
Yeah, it's that commodity thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a commodity, if I can switch out, then there's competition, and it really is its price.
Yeah.
I just thought.
Oh, go ahead.
I just thought of another one.
Okay.
I fly airplanes, as I told you,
Yep.
and I pay my flight instructors by the hour. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they don't know that I'm going to continue or not. They don't know how many hours it's going to take me to get to the next level. They have to pay for an airplane, or I have to pay for an airplane rental if I wasn't flying one of my own. So is that bad?
If everyone's happy, it's not bad, but let me actually tell a story. You know Joe Pine from the Experience Economy?
I know the name, yes.
Yeah, he's hilarious and super smart. And he told a story on my podcast about his golf pro. So he takes golf lessons, same thing. It's like, whatever, $75 for 45 minutes or something like that. And he had been doing it for a while, and he got to talking with the guy, and the guy was, the pro was like, oh, what do you do? And he said, oh, I'm writing a book right now about the experience economy and how what your pricing is like the experience, not the service. And that he's in the business of transforming his clients, and he prices the transformation. And the golf pro did not get it. And he's like, I don't understand. He said, well, imagine if instead of me paying you $75 per visit, I paid you some reduced hourly rates, just for sake of argument, like $35 for the appointment, but I'd give you $5,000 if you could get me down to a 2 handicap. So like a sort of a bonus. And he said that the golf pro sort of stood back and looked him up and down and was like, you could see he was thinking like, can I get this guy to a 2 handicap? And then he must have said yes in his head. And then the pro started saying, all right, here's what we would do if we were going to do that. You'd come 5 times a week, not 2 times a week. And we would go out on the course. We wouldn't be practicing on the putting, or the driving range. I would teach you the logic of the course. There's a word for it, actually, like how to play a specific course, the strategy of the course, and all this other stuff that he never taught Joe before. He never thought to teach Joe before. He's just like, I show up for 45 minutes and get my $75, and we hit some balls. And all along, and Joe never said, oh, I want to get down to a 2. Like, they never talked about the desired outcome. And once they did talk about the desired outcome and aligned the financial incentives, so the golf pro would want to he would have been knocking on Joe's door, pulling him out of bed. Like, no, bro, I want that $5,000 bonus. You're not skipping a day. So back to your question, what's the transformation that you want from the flight instructor, and what's that worth to you? And they could price that, their contribution to that. You've got the plane and the fuel and all the other expenses. But if they price the transformation, it would be a completely different ballgame. It might even change the way they deliver the service.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to think about. But in my mind, I can't stop thinking they would say, oh, on average, it takes 30 hours to get this rating. So if I cut that in half and I put a big number on top, then maybe I could make more if I could get you there faster. And we could be committed to it. So in my head, I'm still thinking, what's the numbers? How do I make more money in less time?
Well, for this particular example, I'm not sure what the rules. I mean, you have to have a certain number of hours in the air, right? So there's
for some certifications, yes.
Okay, so there's a certain minimum. But if you talk about if the transformation,
by the way, it took me way more than that to learn how to fly an airplane.
Okay,
Go ahead.
If you price the transformation, so it'd be like, hey, Mark, how bad do you want to be a pilot? How fast do you want to be a pilot? What's your buying power, right? So like it might be that, and how differentiated is this person? So like in my mind, the formula for value or maximum price, the maximum price that any buyer would agree to is a pseudo formula of desire times money divided by options. So the desire is how badly the buyer wants the thing. The money is their buying power, how much access to capital they have. And the options is how many, undercutting, right? Who else could do this for me? So if you, Mark, have a tremendously high desire, it's urgent, it's important, you dreamed that, you're just dying to be a pilot, and you've got a ton of money. And this flight instructor or whatever they're called is the one and only for what you want. Maybe there's some special, maybe it's, I don't know, barrel rolls or trick something, right? They're the one, they're the expert, and you wouldn't even consider someone else. Then they can set an extremely high price and you will say yes. So the case might be that for you specifically, your flight instructor is not that well differentiated. Your desire is medium and your buying power is medium. So there's a maximum number there that is going to be agreeable to both parties. But if he becomes the only option and you are Jeff Bezos and you've been dying to fly since you were a little kid, then that number could be $1 million for the same amount of time.
Makes all the sense in the world.
You might lose your flight instructor, though. Don't let him listen to this episode.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Whenever I can't hire people because they listen to my stuff and then they just raise the prices on me.
I always tell my friends, I'll coach you on your pricing, but you can't raise my price. So it seems fair.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What's the best reason you have on your list for not using hourly prices?
Artificially limits your income. Top answer. That's the most self-serving answer. So if you sell somebody an hour, you cannot make it more efficient. It takes an hour to deliver it. Let's assume everyone's ethical in the equation, which is not the case, but often is not the case. But if you sell an hour, you got to work an hour. Full stop. How many hours are in a year? And then what's the maximum hourly rate that you can charge? Because you're giving somebody a handle to compare apples to apples against other people. So at a certain point, most people, and there are some exceptions, I've talked to some lawyers that can name their rate. They still track their time, but they're basically just working for people who are so rich they don't care it's $2,000 an hour, or the risks are so high that they want the best and whatever, the price is no object. But barring that, my background's in software development. So if you're a software developer and you're charging $300 an hour, no, it's just highly unlikely unless you're very, very well positioned and you're the one and only at something. So most people, tons of people, they find that there's a ceiling on the hourly rate that appears acceptable to their buyers. And it's not logical. It's not really rational. It's only half the equation of finding out what the price is. No one ever gets an exact answer on how many hours it's going to be from an hourly biller. So they haven't really gotten a price, but they're forced to make a decision as if they had gotten a price. So, most people in software, when they come to me, they're in their 40s, they're getting a little gray upstairs, and they've maybe got 2 kids in school, and they haven't increased the amount of money they make per year in like 5 years. because they're at the top. They're doing well. They're doing really well, but they can see that the writing is on the wall. I am stuck here. If I can't raise my rates anymore, I'm starting to lose jobs to Upwork and the Philippines, and I don't know if I would hire me anymore. And they're like, wow, I'm at a ceiling. Now what? And the answer is you can just stop billing and start pricing.
Yeah, I have two things that I would say about that, but let's do one at a time.
Okay.
If I can remember them both. So the first one is the scope problem, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things I love about software is it's pretty easy to say, hey, this is the outcome you want. But then if you've ever been in software development, the outcome I want changes, especially once I've had a user try to use it and it's like, no, it doesn't work right. And let's get that to happen. And so you hourly rates, I don't have to worry about that. Yeah. You want me to keep working? I'll keep working.
As the seller, you don't have to worry about it.
Right.
So I would suggest that what you're thinking of as an outcome is probably a scope or a feature set or some deliverable. And that's not the outcome the buyer actually wants. So you need to drill past that. You need to get past that. For software developers, I can speak to this very authoritatively. It's very common for clients to come to you with like a picture in their head of what the app is going to look like and the use cases and how users are going to interact with it. And that's great. And you can get all that information in your initial call. But the way I do it, I don't scope first, I scope last. So if they say, okay, here's this punch list of things that we want, we understand you're great at this. And I'm like, great, let's talk about it. They brain dump for 25 minutes or so. I take a bunch of notes and then I say, this is awesome. Can we back up a second? Because I want to understand the business context that this software is going to be released into, because that will inform tons of decisions. Like, for example, is the goal to have 10,000 concurrent users per second? Or is there a maximum market of like 300 people in the whole world that are going to use this? Because I'm going to build it in a very different way if I'm building, a footbridge over a creek or the Golden Gate Bridge. They're both bridges, but the expense and the time and everything, the risk, the scope, they're all completely different. So can you tell me what would be a home run here? Like, what are you trying to, once I deliver this, let's say I deliver this to you today, what do you do next? And they're going to say something like, we're going to put it in front of beta users. We want to do a paid beta, and a home run for us would be to have 10 users paying us $100 a month for this beta version of the software. And then we can iterate from there. That's an outcome. A button that allows them to log in is not an outcome. That's just a deliverable. Or like another outcome might be, we don't want this to be vaporware when we take it to the VCs. We want it to actually be functional. We want them to be able to experience it on their own to get it, because it's a complicated concept. We want them to get it. So, okay, so what would that mean? How would you know that VCs get it? And they would say, well, our sales meetings would be very short. They would understand right away what the benefits of the software are. They would be comparing it to the correct competitors and not the wrong competitors. And I was, okay, that's measurable. And now I've got a target as the developer. It's not, I don't get into this fight of like, can you make the logo bigger, or can you make the blue a little bluer? Instead, it's like, I have proof that we're moving the needle on either one of those outcomes or whatever outcome they wanted. Maybe they want to release a really cool piece of software to attract developer talent because they want to hire. There's all sorts of different outcomes, and I would build the thing differently every way. It depends on what the desired outcome is. Just like the Golf Pro example. If Joe's goal was to have like a 0 handicap, the pro would be like, it's impossible. I can't do it. I'm not your guy. Or if you only wanted to have a 10 handicap, I don't know, golf, I don't know if that's good or bad, but it was an easier lift. He would say, okay, that's worth X or whatever. We're going to do it differently. We're actually going to do different things. And it's the same with software. I'm going to do different things in my area of expertise. I'm going to maintain a massive amount of latitude and be able to have flexibility to get to the desired outcome as quickly as possible without cutting corners or cutting the appropriate corners. Because sometimes they do want you to just hack and slash to get it to market quickly. So you have to drill past the initial request and understand the underlying motivation. You have to uncover it. You have to dig it up, because they never think to volunteer to you why they might be doing this, how urgent it is, why they are talking to you and not 100 other people, or maybe they are talking to 100 other people. So That's the real outcome. And you can, and it doesn't change. It's not going to change during the project. They're not going to change their mind and say like, oh, we actually don't want 100 users or 10 users paying $100 a month. That stays the same. Yes, the interface is going to change in flux, and it should. But if you price the value of the outcome in such a way, and then scope it last and say, okay, here's the minimum viable thing I can do to get you to that outcome. And I'm not 100% positive, so I'm not going to charge you 100% of the value, but I could give you an option at 10%, and I can do X, Y, and Z, and that should get you closer to that goal. Or I can, a higher option, a middle option that is more involvement. It's more likely to achieve the desired outcome. And then a third option that it is like the deluxe model, where I really get in there and maximize the likelihood of getting this success. So we partner little, a medium, or a lot.
Nice. Love the answer. We are running out of time, so let me jump to the last question.
Okay.
I was going to ask more because I love this conversation.
Well, we can do it again if you want.
Yeah. Last question of the day. What's one piece of pricing advice you'd give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
Oh, this is huge. You can measure anything. So and this is like a long conversation, so I'll just direct people to a book by Douglas Hubbard called How to Measure Anything, something like the subtitle, something like How to Measure the Intangibles in Business. And he explains very clearly, the very beginning of the book, this changed my life. This book changed my life. He explains very clearly at the beginning of the book what a measurement is for. And once you understand the definition of what a measurement is for, and spoiler alert, it's to make a specific decision. And without knowing what the specific decision is, you don't know how to appropriately measure something. So once you know what the specific decision that's on the table is, then you can find a way to measure it, not exactly, but good enough to support the decision. And it'll just blow your mind. Like, he's got examples of measuring the beauty of a lake, things like that. And it totally follows. Like, it totally makes sense. And I've used that in value pricing conversations with myself and my students, and it totally works. So I highly recommend that book. It's not a pricing book, but I highly recommend that book.
Cool. I will have to go listen to that or go read that book. That sounds neat. Awesome. Jonathan, this has just been fun. I really, really have enjoyed it. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
I would go to jonathenstark.com and sign up for my mailing list. I've got a value pricing email course. We didn't really talk about value pricing today, but that's my favorite project pricing approach. And you can reply to any message and it goes right to my inbox. My email address is probably too long to spell out. You wouldn't be able to do it. But if you just go to Google for The Ditching Hourly Guy, and you'll find me. Perfect.
To our listeners, thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this, would you please leave us a rating and a review? You can get instructions by going to ratethispodcast.com/impact pricing. And I just looked. There was a new review on my first book, which is 12 years old, called Impact Pricing. But someone on Spectrum Reader wrote, "This is the pricing book to buy. If you are pressed for time or are only buying one book on product pricing, this is the book for you. It's short, succinct, understandable, and powerful. You will not only learn the importance of value pricing, it will show you why you should embed it in your organization before designing any product. If failure is not an option, start with this book. You and your organization will change and never look back. It's that good." Sadly, I don't know who Spectrum Reader is, so I get to keep the money I always send to people who leave reviews. And finally, if you have any questions or comments about the podcast or about pricing in general, feel free to send me an email, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.